I'm Judd Myers.
I'm Scott Tipton.
Welcome to Blast Off.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of the Blast Off podcast. I'm your host, Scott Tipton. This week, we'll be having one of our conversation shows. And our guest today is an Emmy Award-winning writer for television, having written for series like Wonder Woman, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, L.A. Law, The New Twilight Zone, and The Outer Limits. He's also a Nebula Award-winning writer of short stories and novels, including Time and Chance, Molokai, Honolulu, and most recently, the wistfully nostalgic novel Palisades Park. He's written some of the best Batman comic book stories ever, including my personal favorite Batman tale of all time, The Autobiography of Bruce Wayne, from The Brave and the Bold number 197, in which we discover how a middle-aged Batman finally learned how to be brave enough to love again. It's an issue I've returned to time and again over the years, when I need to remind myself that you can tell a lifetime's worth of story in only 20 pages. Please enjoy, as Judd Myers talks to the one and only Alan Brennert.
I'm Judd Myers from BlastOffComics.com. We're coming to you from our retail location in North Hollywood, California. We're joined today by Alan Brennert, award-winning and acclaimed novelist, comic book writer, and TV writer as well, a Nebula Award-winning author. We're very honored to have him here, and we're also honored that we will be consigning his collection of comic books and memorabilia, both on our site, BlastOffComics.com, and here in our retail location. Alan, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So you've worked in so many different areas of...
I'm all over the map.
But the most important question that I have after seeing all of the things that you've done is, what was the first comic book you read?
The first comic book I read, it's hard to pin down, but the one that sticks out in my memory the most, aside from perhaps the Dennis the Menace, but the first superhero comic, was the issue of Superman, where one of his robots is at a plastic factory and is accidentally, as any robot would do, of course, plunged his hands into the acid, revealing the metal skeleton underneath. So it's Clark Kent looking at robotic hands.
Wow.
And that's the one that really stands out the most to me. That might have been the first superhero comic that I read.
And of course, Mark Waid, after you said two words, knew exactly what issue number it was.
Yes, the date of it, yes, probably.
And do you remember how old you were when you read that comic?
I think that came out in 60 or 61, so I was probably 6 or 7.
And where did you get it?
I got it at Pitkoff's candy shop on Palisade Avenue in Cliffside Park, New Jersey. Which I actually wrote about in my novel Palisades Park. It was owned by the grandfather of a friend of mine, Miriam Salton. She and I were the best readers in first grade together. And so...
Did you get an award for that?
No, we were just... when the teacher saw that we were, doing okay, she said, you two go off there in the corner and read by yourselves. I'll take care of the rest. And, or at least that's what Miriam tells me. And we used to go to her grandfather's comic shop. She was in charge of opening the comic books every week. And then we would pick out the best comics and buy them and often bring them back to Miriam's house to read. And I remember reading with her The Death of Superman by Jerry Siegel, and that both of us were absolutely in tears. We just thought it was the most moving story we'd ever read. And I think it's still the most moving comic book story I've ever read.
Wow. Back then, thinking back to these comic books that you read, and were your parents, they were supportive?
Oh, they were totally cool about it. Yeah, they never hesitated to buy me whatever weird comic book I wanted. Even the weird Spirit comic that I picked up, I think it was a reprint that was done in the mid-'60s. And I was maybe 12 years old, and I remember reading this story about Sans Serif thinking, I don't think I'm old enough for this. This seems a little too adult for me.
Was there anything then that you remember reading that you somehow transplanted from that as a child into your comic book writing later on as an adult?
Well, the Justice Society of America.
Yeah.
I loved the Justice Society, as did Miriam. And I loved the idea that they were slightly older, that they had lives, that they had gotten married, In effect, they were everything that the regular Earth 1 superheroes couldn't be, because the Earth 1 heroes had to stay sort of the same for merchandising purposes. And I love the fact that these people had lives. Jay Garrick had a wife. When I later went on to write comics for DC, I was attracted to those characters because of that reason, because they were characters who had lives, who had regrets, who had made choices in their life. And I really enjoyed playing with the time that had passed between the 1940s and the 1960s. I remember reading, Julie Schwartz used to have these pages in his comic books devoted to Golden Age characters. Little text features with a little picture of like the first comic that they appeared on, and I just ate those up with a spoon. I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by anything Golden Age and introduced into the Silver Age, and then I got to play with it in the Bronze Age.
You had told me before we started that you would write letters into DC that made it into their letter columns.
Yes, I also to Marvel. My first one was in to a Marvel comic, but when I published a letter in Justice League, I think it was number 75, I felt like I'd arrived, because I'd been trying to get into Julie Schwartz's letter columns for quite a long time. So I became kind of a regular letter hack, as they said in those days. And one of the other letter column regulars in Julie's mags was Martin Pasco, who wrote me a letter. Turned out he lived in virtually the next town over from me in New Jersey. And he wrote me a letter I'll never forget. He said, "How would you like to get together with another enthusiastic fan and do a fanzine?" Which was not anything I'd ever thought of myself, but I thought, that sounds interesting. And we got together and we did a fanzine called Fantasy. It was a news zine. This was about the time that Newfangles was fading out. And we used Marty's contacts with Julie to get a lot of information about upcoming DC comics. We published interviews. I did interviews with Dick Giordano and Roy Thomas. Marty did interviews with Denny O'Neil. And it was a great opportunity to sort of see behind the scenes in the comic book business. Everybody, Roy and Dick, everybody was really generous with their time. And it was a great experience. It was also a great experience just knowing the nuts and bolts of publishing, because we were using photo offset. Now, we were not doing Ditto Masters. And so we were getting our hands dirty.
So you were a child, you're reading comic books. At what point did you think, I want to be a writer? I want to do this? And was it, I want to write for comics, or was it just, I want to be a writer?
It was just, I want to be a writer. And I can't actually recall a time when I didn't want to be a writer. The moment that I recall most vividly was watching an animated sequel to The Wizard of Oz on NBC. And this would have been about 1964. And the next day I started on my little toy typewriter banging out a synopsis of it. In I think sixth grade, I started writing horror stories, and my classmates called me Edgar Allan Brennert. They weren't nearly as good as Poe. And I did consider writing comic books. In fact, I wrote my first submission was a script to a Warren magazine. It was a science fiction magazine, might have been 1984. And it was a little 8-page story. And the editor of it had me make so many changes on it, and then ultimately didn't buy the story, that I thought, man, this is a hassle. I think I'll try writing prose instead, because I'd also been a big fan of the science fiction magazines. And the first things I sold was a short story to a science fiction anthology called Infinity 5.
How old were you when you first sold that?
I was probably about 1972, 18.
So this was before you did any schooling at all. You just, I've been published.
Yeah, Infinity 5 was published in June of 1973. And I think in July, I went to the Clarion Workshop in speculative fiction at Michigan State. But I'd already sold 2 stories, and I sold a third while I was at Clarion to a Marvel digest called The Haunt of Horror, which was edited by Jerry Conway, but Len Wein is the one who plucked my story out of the slush pile, and it remains unpublished to this day, thank God.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's fantastic. So you went to school for writing, specifically for writing fiction?
Well, I went to the Clarion Workshop, which was a summer course,
Right.
which was very instructional, and it also I made friends there that I have to this day. But I was also an English major at college. I was at William Patterson College in New Jersey, and then I transferred out to Cal State University Long Beach when I moved to California. And I was an English major, but I was an English major who was also studying not just writing prose, but also writing plays, writing teleplays, writing screenplays. I was able to sort of pick and choose from various disciplines and learn the basics of a lot of different media, which is actually something that has sort of continued in my career. I like writing different things, different formats, different media, different genres. And that's one of the reasons that my career is sometimes a little hard to map, but it's been a satisfying one.
Who would you say was your greatest influence back then, or the writers who inspired you the most?
As a television writer, I was inspired by Rod Serling and Pat Chayefsky and James Costigan. As a fantasy writer and even as a mainstream novelist, I was inspired by Daniel Keyes' Flowers for Algernon, which is a wonderfully, wonderfully moving book, as well as stuff you read in school like Silas Marner by George Eliot and Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. So I've got a lot of different influences. One of the big influences on me as a writer was a writer named Robert Anderson, who wrote a play called Silent Night, Lonely Night, which was made into a wonderful TV movie with Lloyd Bridges and Shirley Jones. And that movie kind of directly inspired my novel, Kindred Spirits. And I was actually very, very happy. About 20 years ago, I got to meet Lloyd Bridges at a wrap party for The Outer Limits and tell him just how much that movie had meant to me.
Obviously, writing for long format and writing for short format are very, very different experiences. And you've now done quite a bit of both. Mm-hmm. Looking at your TV work and obviously you've done quite a bit. And then looking at comic book work, say in 20 pages, you have to tell a story with a beginning, middle, and end, mm-hmm. just like in 20 minutes. Mm-hmm. You have to write the same kind of story. Do you see parallels to that?
Well, they were similar in that you are using continuing characters that you haven't created, and there's a certain format that you have to hew to. I actually had better luck expressing myself in comic books than I did in television in the early 80s. In television, I did a lot of development at that time that didn't get made, or scripts that got rewritten by other hands. So comic books actually became kind of a nice release. It came about as an accident. My friend Paul Levitz was in town. He was editing the Batman titles, and I said to him, I have an idea for a Batman story that maybe one of your writers might want to do. And he said, "You're a writer. Why don't you write it?" And I told him the idea. He loved it. And the next thing I knew, I was writing this story that I called To Kill a Legend, thinking it would be a fill-in issue of Batman somewhere or detective. And the next thing I knew, it was the lead story in Detective 500.
500.
And that led to me doing a bunch more Batman stories and getting to play with characters I'd loved as a child, like the Hawk and the Dove and Creeper and Earth 2 characters, like the Earth 2 Robin. And I actually got more creative satisfaction out of doing those comics at that time than I was getting from television. So I was always grateful for the opportunity that I had to do those, from Dick Giordano and from Denny O'Neil, who asked me to write an issue of Daredevil, not knowing it was my favorite Marvel character as a kid. And I always gave Denny enormous props for hiring me, because back when I was a letter hack and writing into JLA, I said some pretty terrible things about his stories. And either Denny didn't remember, or he was a big enough man not to care.
Or he agreed with you.
Possibly.
Speaking of Daredevil, you have quite a bit of Daredevil in your personal collection that we are consigning for the site, including this extraordinary copy of Daredevil #1, which looks like it's just been pressed underneath something for so many years. It looks like it just came off the stand.
A number of other comic books, yes.
Right. And quite a few of your Daredevils look exactly like that. So what was it about Daredevil that made him your favorite Marvel character?
I love the costume, the Wallywood redesigned costume, but I love the whole conceit of it. A blind man who's an attorney by day and a vigilante by night. And that to me was just a great idea. I mean, I still think it would make a great television show. And I know there have been fits and starts at getting that done, but it's a terrific concept. And I also really loved the Gene Colan artwork. When I started reading Daredevil, it was with Gene Colan. And there was a weight to his lines. There was a weight to the characters that you didn't see in very many other artists at the time. I mean, Jack Kirby was great. There was a different kind of weight to his. Colan was really realistic. His characters, were distinctive. His use of shadow was beautiful, and Stan Lee's scripts were fun. I mean, they had arguably some of the worst villains, in the Marvel canon.
Come on, Stiltman.
Stiltman. I made an oblique reference to Stiltman in the one issue that I wrote. Nothing quite so bad as some of Ant-Man's villains, but still, some of them were pretty lame, but they were enjoyable anyway. And so I just loved that character, and I think, in retrospect, I love the fact that he didn't have superpowers, because when I started writing Batman, it felt very natural for me. I liked writing a character without superpowers who had to rely on his wits, and his strength and his long years of preparation. And Daredevil was like that. Even though he did have his radar sense, he wasn't invulnerable. I actually, the few times I tried to write really superpowered characters, I found that it really wasn't my forte. I was more comfortable with writing, more realistic characters like Batman and Daredevil.
Interesting that one of the things that I think people forget quite a bit about Daredevil is that he really is a detective.
Yes.
There's always a crime that needs to be solved. Someone needs to be found, and the truth needs to come out.
That's right. That's right. I mean, in a way, he was Perry Mason in red tights. Because in the old Perry Mason show, you always had him or Perry or Paul Drake going out there and interviewing people, interviewing witnesses. And even at the time, I'm looking at this and thinking, don't the cops do this? But that was the conceit of it. Perry Mason was the detective. And Daredevil just took that, one extreme step forward. He investigated the crimes that in which he was representing, the defendant. Which is, of course, why he's disbarred now in the Marvel Universe.
Well, that description of him I will be using with customers in the store, and I promise I'll give you credit.
Well, for those of them who remember Perry Mason...
Well, I can insert pretty much any law show at that.
There you go.
You've written for
LA Law, yes.
We can throw that in there.
Okay.
Going through Law and Order. Let's throw in Law and Order.
Got it.
Speaking of detective, looking at this Detective Comics 500 and reading the story again. One thing that's really fascinating to me about your Batman, and I do mean your Batman because it's a very specific type of Batman, he really is a detective. It's, Batman of today is very different.
Yeah.
It's sort of very cinematic in that Batman can beat up this one, Batman can beat up that one, who will win Batman versus Superman. But in the old comics, all the way up through the 70s, Batman was the best detective in the world.
He was.
He was Sherlock Holmes. And I found that, interestingly, he was training Robin to be a detective, not to be a fighter. That's why he kept saying to him, stay or watch what I do and learn. And he was, Robin was always jumping into the fray.
Right.
But really what he was trying to teach him was how to be a detective.
Yeah.
And we don't get a lot of that today. One of the panels that I was really struck by this was Robin says this might be a world without heroes except for its Batman. And Batman, as Bruce Wayne says, that's supposition, Dick, not deduction. Didn't I teach you better than that?
Well, that's the Batman that I sort of grew up on. Julie Schwartz is the one who made him a detective again after 10 years of fighting the gorilla boss of Gotham City and the Rainbow Batman and all the rest of those. And so I just was sort of following in that vein, but at the same time trying to put a little bit more emotion into the character. I mean, Denny actually put a lot of emotion into the character, but I saw other ways of doing it that hadn't been done, and I wanted to play around with that.
The reason why things like that struck me, obviously, you were writing as if the young people that were reading this had a vocabulary. That may or may not be true, but you wrote as if Whereas I think a lot of comics today write down to people.
Well, there are certainly fewer words.
That's exactly right.
Bigger pictures, fewer words, and you can read a comic book in about a minute and a half.
And I wonder if that is a negative aspect of cinema, superhero cinema on the comic books, or if there's just people who read less. But there, in the comics, there's very little dialogue, and the idea of word and thought balloons has disappeared.
That's the thing that I found most interesting. When I went back to write a story for Batman Black and White, I knew I couldn't put thought balloons in there because they just weren't being used anymore. Somebody had decided, oh, these are cliche, these are trite, these are retro. So I wound up using captions, first-person captions, Batman narrating the story through those. Somehow people don't find that cliched or trite. It's still it's a narrator. It's a narrative voice. But yeah, I miss thought balloons too.
It's interesting that you mentioned captions because I remember as a young boy having my comic books and teaching myself to read through all these thought and word balloons. And I remember the day that I discovered that the captions actually said something that related to the panels and the story. And I remember being thrilled and going back through my collection and rereading everything with a whole new perspective. And I think that, interestingly, today, maybe they're writing for older readers as opposed to young minds. I remember as a kid needing thought balloons. I needed that because it constantly kept me following the story. I didn't want to see Batman just jumping off a roof.
Yeah. I
wanted to know why he was jumping off a roof and where he was going through the city.
Well, comic books, started out as an outgrowth of the pulp magazines, and in prose, you do have interior monologue. You do know what your character is thinking. But now, as you say, the comics are mirroring dramatic media, television. Right. They've taken the decompressed style of a show like Lost, which I got very tired of after 2 seasons myself. But they've taken that decompression, slowing everything down, and they've decided, okay, all the information has to come out through the character's dialogue or the action, or maybe the occasional narrative caption. Which you do lose something that way. You do lose a sense of connection to the character because you're looking at the character from the outside in rather than the inside out. I mean, I could never write a novel without having interior monologues, without being able to get into my characters' heads. That's what makes people fall in love with characters. It's what they're thinking as well as what they're doing. And so I think comics today, they're settling for a superficiality, a very surfacey kind of flash. And I think one of the reasons is because you've lost stuff like that. You've lost interior monologue in rare cases, except for rare cases.
Again, interesting that what it used to be in comics, from obviously what I see every day and what I read, everything was a mystery to be solved. And mostly in one issue. It was an episodic format, but it started with something that you had to figure out.
Yes.
And looking at, say, episodics on television, right, LA Law, from what I remember of that show, there was always a mystery to be solved, but there were a lot of scenes of people talking and relationships and in boardrooms and outside. There was a lot of that. Whereas now we have Law and Order and CSU and all the things that we've got.
And it's all procedural.
It's procedural.
Yeah.
And we never know anything about these characters.
Yeah.
We don't know where they come from, what they do when they go home.
Yeah.
What kind of relationships they have outside. It's just by the numbers.
Yeah.
Interview, and figure out at the end who done it.
I was offered Law and Order, and I was tempted to take it because it's a good show, and I admired it, but I wasn't sure if I could really be happy writing that kind of format. I am comfortable with plot, but I am not a plot-driven writer. I'm a character-driven writer, and that's what made LA Law fun. It even made fun. My very first mystery show that I wrote for was Simon and Simon, and that was at least as much comedy and character as it was mystery. You had to have a good mystery, but once you had that, you could have as much fun with the characters as you wanted to.
Speaking of that, there was another thing that really struck me about this story. I love this story so much. At the end of this, in the epilogue of this story, and if I'm ruining this for everybody, too bad, go read it yourself, but I'm going to talk about it.
You've had 30 years to read this already.
Yeah.
The time for spoilers, it's past.
At the end of this story, we have Bruce Wayne here, little Bruce Wayne. His parents have not died.
Mm-hmm.
His parents have been saved.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, because of what he saw, this Batman in a world of no superheroes,
mm-hmm.
he's inspired anyway
mm-hmm.
to become Batman. It will not be a decision born of grief or guilt or vengeance, but of awe and mystery and gratitude. We don't have that Batman.
No,
he doesn't exist.
No. And, it was a kind of a radical idea for the time, even because Batman was driven to a certain extent, less than he is now, but he was driven by the death of his parents, even in the 70s. And I just thought, well, what if there was another way of getting there? And Mark Waid claims that there was an imaginary story which was had a similar premise to this, and he always assumed that I had sort of done a riff on it, and I swear I had never read it. Maybe I did. Maybe I owe royalties to some a writer from the 1950s, but I just thought I was doing a riff on parallel worlds, which I always loved.
Yeah, I wonder what your Batman would have been having continued that. A Batman in awe and grateful to be Batman, and that's about mystery solved and the happiness of being a hero.
Yeah,
I know that it wouldn't be the Batman everybody expects.
Yeah,
but it would be a great alternate Batman.
It would. It would have been fun to follow that up. Somehow, nobody ever suggested that to me. I didn't, think of it, and I just hope to God that it doesn't turn up in Multiversity.
No comment. Well, this, of course, we have copies of this from your collection, which will be signed, which would be actually wonderful. You can read these stories yourself and have signatures to go along with it. These comics and others written by Alan will be signed. You can buy them on the site and in the store. And along with this wonderful story from Detective Comics 500 to Kill a Legend, we'll have a signed outline and a script for the story. Written by Alan. And it's a wonderful opportunity for everybody to see the interior of your mind. We have other scripts as well and outlines. One here from Wonder Woman, number 232.
This was actually a script written by Marty Pasco based on a story by me.
Interestingly enough, while we're talking about Wonder Woman 232, we have here a page of art from 232. It's an original page of comic book art, Duel of Gods. It's beautiful. It's the splash page, and we will have it for sale. It's pretty great. I really like it. Vinnie Coletta, not Vince Coletta, Vinnie Coletta. It's great. So have a look on the site and in the store along with the script to it. We have other outlines and scripts. This is Superman, A Game for Gods. There's a story outline. This will also be signed.
This is actually the very first version of A Duel of Gods.
Really?
Yeah. When Marty was working for DC at the time, and I was a struggling, starving college student writing for the science fiction magazines. And he knew I needed money, so he said, well, why don't you plot a couple of issues of Superman for me, or one issue of Superman? So I came up with this Superman plot, and then he got assigned to do Wonder Woman. He said, can we do it as a Wonder Woman story instead? So I changed it into Wonder Woman. And at that point, they had changed over to the Golden Age continuity because of the TV show. And so I thought, I got to put the Justice Society in this. So it was, even though it was sort of the second tier characters, it was an opportunity to write the JSA for the first time. Yes, this is the very, very first germinative stage of the idea. A game became a duel. Yes.
And you can also get to see Alan's old P.O. box.
That's right, in Long Beach.
We have another script here from The Twilight Zone. Obviously, you did quite a bit of work for The Twilight Zone.
I did quite a bit. I wrote about 12 or 13 scripts for it, I think.
That's fantastic. And, of course, a Nebula Award.
For Maquis, short story Maquis.
You talked about parallel worlds, because that story was a parallel world type of story. It went through time. And is it real or isn't it real? Looking at the history of your work, You know, you say as a child you were so struck by these stories, and then you were also influenced by so many writers. The idea of time travel and parallel worlds and going back and forth in history seems to be a constant theme to your work.
I guess so, when you put it that way. I certainly did an entire novel about parallel worlds called Time and Chance.
Time and Chance.
Which really was sort of like an extended Twilight Zone episode, but it had its roots in the Justice Society stories that I read as a kid.
And was also very emotional. The idea of what if? What if you could live a different life? And how would you do that? How could you accomplish something like that?
Yeah.
And emotionally, what would it do to you and the people around you?
Which is the theme also of a lot of the comic stories that I did. Interlude on Earth 2, in which the characters are looking back at at the decisions that they've made, and certainly the autobiography of Bruce Wayne. The story about how the Golden Age Catwoman and Batman fell in love.
Right. Also a very interesting story because for the most part, that story, Batman is confused and not in control at all.
No.
And that's not a Batman we see.
No, it isn't.
Batman never loses control. It's too human.
I have to say, I've never gotten a single note on any of those Batman stories that ever said, "Gee, we don't think Batman would do this." Not from Paul Levitz, not from Dick Giordano, and not from Len Wein, who edited the Bruce Wayne story. So I was really kind of playing with aspects of his character, and in that one I just took it further than I thought I'd taken it in any of the other stories.
Do you think that you'd be capable of writing the Batman of today?
I don't know. I have not read Batman since before the reboot. I admired what Grant Morrison was doing before that, and when DC rebooted, I just decided that I had no more room in my head for DC continuity, and I have not been reading the books. So I have no idea whether or not I could write the Batman. I might be able to write the Batman that Grant Morrison was writing, but I have no idea what's going on now.
Well, many don't. I wonder if there's a room for history in continuity, even in Marvel continuity these days. Looking at your novels, these extraordinary novels that you're writing now, these long form novels, even those are historical fiction.
Oh, yeah.
You go back in time. I obviously love time travel. That's really wonderful. And I love how things weave into history. Not so much alternate history, but actual history.
Yeah.
Are you enjoying exploring that? Is that something that, after all these years, the freedom of that?
I sort of backed into becoming a historical novelist. Originally, I was writing a contemporary novel set on the island of Molokai. And the more I researched, the more I learned about the leprosy settlement called Kalapapa. And I was writing a book I wanted to write a book about the bonds of community in some exotic place. And I realized that Kalapapa was the ultimate story about the bonds of community. And in doing the research, I discovered that I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed the research. I really enjoyed sort of getting to peer into a past world through newspapers and diaries and photographs of from the state archives. And I enjoyed recreating that world. I'd written fantasy books, and in a sense, in fantasy, you're creating a different world as well. But it's one that has to be made plausible. You can't just have no rules. You have to make it something that people can relate to. And I find the same rules apply in historical. You have to make it so grounded in reality that people really feel that they are back in time. And so, yeah, I enjoy doing it very much.
Do you think that now in your career that being a novelist, writing long-form novels, this is what you just like to continue to do from here on out? Or are there things that you feel like I've not done that and I still want to do that?
I would still like to have a produced feature film. I developed a number of screenplays for various studios and wrote some screenplays on spec. None of them got produced. There is a screenplay of Time and Chance that is at a fairly large company right now, and they are trying to get a star to appear in it. And if that gets made, I will be very happy. But if it doesn't get made, I do enjoy writing books, and I can just write books for the rest of my life because I have a freedom in them that I never had in television and film. I'm the one who is controlling the story, with input from my editor. And these are my characters. I spent a lot of time in my career writing other people's characters, whether they were comic characters or television characters. And now I get to write my own. And it's great because it's nice to know nobody is going to come down the line and write a story which completely vitiates, the point, of the one that you wrote 10 years previously.
The Earth 2 Molokai.
Yes, I like to say that writing comic books is fun, but it's a lot like building a house on sand. You never know when the waves are going to come along and wipe out everything that you did. So it's really gratifying to me that people still remember stories like the Batman stories and my Supergirl story, even though they've been, effectively wiped from continuity.
So your novels translated into other languages.
Yes, it's a great feeling, and sometimes I discover it by accident on the internet. Yesterday, I stumbled across a French-Canadian edition of Molokai that was being published this week, and I thought, would have been nice for somebody to tell me about that. But it is really, really nice to have them translated into French, into Romanian, Turkish, Spanish. There's no greater satisfaction than traveling abroad and seeing something that you wrote on a shelf somewhere. And for many years, what I would see would be one of these.
Right.
I was in a shopping mall in Vienna, maybe 25 years ago, and there was a little tobacco shop, and outside of it, they had a rack with comic books on it. And there was a little digest-sized reprint of that story, Paper Chase, and it was great because I was flipping through it, and there's an exchange in there in which the Creeper says to Batman when he goes into the Batcave, "Hey, great place you got here, Bats. Ever thought of going condo?" In German, that translated into "Danke für die Blumen," which is "Thanks for the compliment."
Okay.
And there's no mention of the condo at all.
I didn't know what a condo was.
So my current translators are not taking such liberties. It's a little bit like Vinnie Coletta, wiping out some of your words. But oops, you didn't have time for that.
But you're reaching more people than you ever have.
I have.
As a novelist all over the world. It's extra, and it's forever.
Yeah.
Once it's done, it's forever.
Yeah, that's the satisfying thing is that it used to be with television that they just sort of vanished into the ether after they were done. Well, now you have DVDs, so there is a certain permanence. And I'm finding a lot of satisfaction in seeing the Twilight Zone that I worked on being, coming out in DVD and being released and re-released and re-released and reaching a whole new generation of viewers. But the books are something special because Twilight Zone was a unique opportunity. It was an opportunity for me to write original stories, with original characters, and produce them myself and see them through all the way the production process. But that didn't happen often in my career. I didn't always have that opportunity. And so books, you're not just the writer, but you're also the director. You're the set decorator, you're the actors, you got to do all of this stuff. And there is a point occasionally when I'm writing something where I think, God, I'm describing a scene, and I'm thinking, God, isn't there a department head who can do this for me? But then I realize this is the job I took.
You are the department head.
I am the department head, so I'd better get working.
And you get your own coffee.
That's true. I do have craft services.
Talking about Twilight Zone, one of the things that is in your collection is a wonderful run of these Twilight Zone magazines.
I think it's a complete run, actually.
It's a complete run, and they're in beautiful condition. I love that this is the premiere issue. A New Story by Harlan Ellison. Brand new.
Yes.
There were
What's the date on that?
This is April 1981.
Wow.
For $2. $2.
If you had told me when I bought that issue off the newsstand that 3 years from then I would be writing for a revival of the Twilight Zone, I would have said, go lie down until the fever passes. I mean, it came out of the blue, It was a series of serendipity because I had worked for Phil DeGuerre on Simon and Simon. He also knew that I wrote fantasy, and he just happened to be asked by CBS to bring back The Twilight Zone. And
there's not a lot of people that could have done that successfully.
No,
that's a big, huge effort.
It was, and Phil really was the ideal person to do it because he was. He had strong ideas, but he also respected other people's ideas. When I took the job as executive story consultant on that show, he said to me, he says, look, I have very strong ideas, and I'll do everything in my power to try to get you to see things my way. But you can do everything in your power to make me see things your way. If you win, great. If I win, even better. And I thought, I can work with this guy. And indeed, he was really one of the best producers I'd ever worked with, and I miss him to this day. He just he left us too early, but he really encouraged us all to do our best, and he was open to Harlan and me looking at stories and going, no, this isn't good enough, or this one's not salvageable. You have to toss it, because we were pretty tough critics because we were the prose guys on staff. And so we knew the history of fantasy, and Harlan could say, yeah, this story was done in 1939 by Fred Brown in Unknown. I wasn't quite that fluent in it, but I could tell an old idea when I saw one. So, but it worked out well. Phil DeGuerre, Jim Crocker, Harlan, later George Martin, and other writers, Michael Cassett. It was a great staff.
And George Martin actually has an original story in this first premiere issue as well.
Well, this should ratchet up the price of this issue a little bit.
Stephen King, an interview.
Yeah, Stephen
King. They really threw everything into
the first issue.
For only $2. I can guarantee you that it won't be $2. But you can certainly have a look at it on the site and in the store. While we're talking about some of the books in your collection, we have a lot of interesting things other than just Daredevil. We have these fireside hardcovers, which are very hard to come by, these fireside hardcovers. Certainly this one is a little bit more obscure. Mm-hmm. We've had the trade paperback in the store and on the site, but very rarely have we had the hardcover. Mm-hmm. It's wonderful to have this. And another wonderful hardcover we have is this Incredible Hulk. I love that cover.
Yeah, isn't that great?
And this is Simon & Schuster. And these hardcovers back then, this was the way that you got these collections. Mm-hmm. This was the way that if you were going to get them,
sure,
you'd have to buy them in this way. And they're very hard to come by, and they're hard to come by in this wonderful condition. We have the first appearance of Harley Quinn in Batman Adventures, number 12. That's kind of a great modern comic to have in your collection. I'm sure that was not what you suspected that it would be.
I had no idea. For a while, DC was sending me these things every week, and I would read them and enjoy them and put them in a pile somewhere.
But you look at the pressing of this and the pressing of this Daredevil. Boy, you took care of your comic books.
I tried.
We have run of Spirit magazine, this wonderful Warren magazine. You have some creepies. You have Amazing World of DC Comics. Mm-hmm. That's kind of wonderful because it has a photo and an article of Linda Carter,
which was the first TV show I wrote for.
It is the first TV show.
That was Wonder Woman was the first show.
What was the first? What was the episode? What was it? Come on, we got to have
all right. It was 1978, so bear in mind it was Disco Devil.
That's great. I love it.
Not my title, Bruce Lansbury's title. And it was about a guy who was telepathic. And he was being used by a bad guy to get secrets from, Washington bigwigs. And that was the first episode. I wound up running 4 episodes for them total. The one I liked the best was the last one called The Girl with a Gift for Disaster, because there was less time for the network to screw it up. They sort of rushed it into production. The network said, hey, we like this one. And they rushed it into production, and it didn't get revised too much.
And that story was, what was the...
Oh, it was about a young woman who had the ability to kind of scramble probability lines. She was a jinx, in short. Disasters happened around her. Again, the bad guy, decides to use her to create disasters as a cover for crimes. But I had 2 wonderful, wonderful actors in that. Jane Ackman and Jimmy Sloyan, who would later go on. He appeared in one of my Buck Rogers, playing a character called Barney, who was based on Black Barney from the original comic strip. And Jimmy was a fun guy. Jimmy was a fun guy and a really good actor. And that episode was, out of all 4 of them, that was the one I was most pleased with. And certainly the only one that I can look at again today.
Interestingly, with that show, you really were writing the classic Wonder Woman. You were writing. I mean, in comics, we only got that in sensation comics, and you were into the Silver Age.
Yeah. I kind of preferred the World War II episodes myself. I really liked, the World War II episodes. And when they brought it into the present day, it became more of a regular crime show because they avoided supervillains. But I still tried to slip in characters with superpowers, even though they weren't wearing costumes. There was something in there to make it a little bit more than just a bank robbery. I remember part of one episode. My favorite set memory from that was we were shooting a night scene because there was a blackout. And it was on the Warner Brothers lot, and it was like 8 o'clock at night, and I just happened to be there just to hang around. And Lyle Waggoner looks at me and says, "This is all your fault that we're here hanging around here at 8 o'clock at night in the dark." And he throws an empty Coke can at me. And I said, "Lyle, I tried writing a blackout in the middle of the day. It didn't work." Lyle is a great guy.
Okay, so we have some really interesting collectibles I want to talk about. One of them here is this Wonder Woman cookie bank.
Speaking of bank robberies.
This is a really interesting piece. What can you tell us about this?
This was given to me by my friend Bill Taylor, who was also a writer for Wonder Woman and Buck Rogers. He and I attended grad school together at UCLA as screenwriting majors. And he gave this to me as a present. I had gotten him into Wonder Woman, and he gave this to me as a present one year, and I think he had it as a planter. I think there was like a philodendron kind of growing out of this thing. That died a long time ago. But it's a beautiful painted. You'll find unpainted versions of this on eBay, but not always. Yes, and here's the lovely rear shot.
Yes, there she is.
With the golden lasso. But this has been painted, and I kept it for years. But there comes a time when you need to just start making space in the kitchen where your wife is going, do we really need a Wonder Woman cookie jar? Do we really need the Marvin the Martian?
Yes, you do.
I know. I did tell her we did need the Marvin the Martian mug, but this I'm willing to part with.
Yes, well, it's such a collectible. I don't know that people would just put it in their kitchen and put cookies in it. Now, a plant.
A plant, yeah. Different thing, yeah.
Anyway, this is a really, really interesting piece. I like it a lot. It's definitely different. And we have some paintings and posters and things that I'd love to talk about. Let's do these.
Okay. This is a painting by my friend Greg Bear, who is better known as a Nebula and Hugo Award-winning science fiction novelist. But he's also a very good artist. He did the cover for one of his books called Cyclone. This was an illustration that he did on commission from me for a novel, a young adult novel that I was writing. Actually, I wrote it when I was in college. It was called The Floating Island, and it was about the adventures of a young Jules Verne who hooks up with a guy named Nemo and discovers that he has a submarine called the Nautilus. And this is the one unfinished novel that I have. I never did finish this, and part of that was because there came a TV series in the 80s, I think, called The Adventures of Jules Verne, which was about a young Jules Verne, and he gets involved in all of the things that he writes about as an adult. So that pretty much killed that novel idea. But Greg did just a great job with this, and the Nautilus is beautifully depicted and very faithfully depicted.
The lines are great. We have here in this extraordinary purple frame.
This is the frame is I put on it, but this was a set decoration that we used on an episode of Twilight Zone called The Star, which was about people from Earth finding this civilization that had been destroyed by a nova. And they had put all of their prized artifacts and literature and culture and art buried inside one of their moons so that it was protected. And one is this wonderful painting of children, these blue-skinned, pink-haired children. And this was done by our storyboard artist, James Hegedus, who today is better known for having been a production illustrator on on movies like Captain America, The First Avenger, The Chronicles of Narnia, Forrest Gump, Moneyball. He's an extraordinarily talented artist. This is a print of the original, which he signed to me. And it's a lovely, lovely piece. And I think this would make a nice addition to any Twilight Zone fans.
Yes, colors are gorgeous.
Yeah, he did a fine job. You can see why he went on to great things.
This is fascinating, this piece right here.
Keeping this all in one family. This was done by Greg Bear's then wife, Tina Bear, who is now goes by the name Tina Chong. She is she was a fine artist back then, and she's an even better artist now. I commissioned her to do this picture of the protagonists of my novel Kindred Spirits, who throughout the book appear in kind of ghostly phantom form. And what I wanted was this snow scene in the background in black and white, and then Michael and Ginny in color. And Tina did just a brilliant job with this. Did it exactly as I'd hoped for. She has since become very well known. She does watercolors that are exquisitely beautiful. You can find her work on SkyShadowStudios.net or .com, one of those. But this is one of her very earliest works.
You would expect that they would be in black and white and everything else would be in color. I love that it's inverted like that.
Yeah, that I just thought it would look better that way.
Just based on the Kindred Spirits storyline. Okay, this is fabulous.
Self-explanatory.
Yes.
This was one of the original promo posters that were distributed to comic book shops for Detective 500. And I got one of these and got it framed, and it has hung on the wall of several houses of mine, but we have not had room for it in this one. And frankly, I think my wife thinks there's enough comic book stuff there on the walls anyway.
Well, imagine this with a signed copy of the comic itself and a signed copy of the script. I think that is a pretty extraordinary group of items together. Okay, I saved this for last, the best for last.
It is the
because
best.
It's just too amazing. Okay, I'm going to keep it on the ground because if we lift it up, we'll die.
We'll get a hernia. Yes.
Okay.
This, believe it or not, is a prop from an episode of Simon and Simon I wrote called The Wrong Stuff, which was starred Diane Kay from 8 is Enough as a school teacher who, when she was young and needing money, did a sort of innocuous horror movie called Vampire Cheerleaders, which years later is recut, put in with some softcore sex scenes, and becomes Vampire Cheerleaders XXX. And this she discovers hanging outside of a theater one day while taking her class on a field trip. And they're all looking out going, "Oh, Miss Smith, isn't that you? Isn't that you? And she winds up hiring the Simons to find out, what happened here. And this poster is notable this is actually not a poster. This is the original. It is done on plasterboard. It is heavy as all hell.
Wow.
Well, I wrote all the copy down there, if anyone cares. Behind the pom-poms beat the ravenous hearts of demons lusting to be set free. Possibly some of my finest prose. Available,
translated all over the world.
Available nowhere else. But the neat thing about this is that twofold. First, somebody actually did wind up making a movie called Vampire Cheerleaders. I think it might also have been sort of a semi-softcore thing, but I've seen it listed in TV listings. I've never seen it. Obviously, I get no royalties. But this poster achieved a second kind of life because Simon & Simon was produced at Universal. And so the art department made prints of this. And it turned up on other Universal series. There was an episode of Murder, She Wrote in which Angela Lansbury is investigating kind of a sleazy film studio. And by God, one of their movies was Vampire Cheerleaders. It has since turned up on a couple other ones of theirs, and so it has a small notoriety. But it really is a wonderful piece of work. I don't know who the artist was, but you can definitely see the resemblance to Diane Kay.
Yes.
And if she gets word of this, she is going to be so mortified.
See, you're meta.
I'm meta.
These things just follow through other people's work.
It's meta on so many levels.
That's fantastic. Well, all of this and more are going to be available on our site, blastoffcomics.com, and of course in our retail store here in Southern California. Alan, thank you so much for coming by and for talking us through this and telling us all about your life's work. It's endlessly fascinating, and I can't wait to see what comes next.
It's been fun. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you.
The Blast Off podcast is produced by the Colonel, Jeff Fox, Scott Tipton, and me. Original music is composed and performed by Derek Anthony Gray. You can find more of his musical compositions on his website, DerekAnthonyGray.com.
For more information about anything you've heard us talk about today, check us out online at blastoffcomics.com. We have an active Facebook presence, so check us out over there on Facebook. And you can reach us on Twitter at blastoffcomics or on Instagram.
Or you can come by our retail location in North Hollywood in the heart of the Arts District, 5118 Lankershim Boulevard in North Hollywood, just 2 blocks south of Magnolia. See you soon.